Ever wonder what war movies actually leave a mark on the director who made Saving Private Ryan and Schindler's List? Here's the shocker. Spielberg's own list goes way beyond Hollywood blockbusters and Oscar bait. He's raved about low-budget oddballs, brutal anti-war statements, and pulpy thrill rides your grandpa probably watched with a bowl of popcorn. So, if Spielberg calls these 15 films essential viewing, what does he know that we don't? Stick around, some of his picks might just blow your mind, or seriously mess with your definition of a war movie. Where Eagles Dare, 1968. Let's start with a war movie that's less about the horrors of combat and more about pure, unfiltered mayhem. Where Eagles Dare isn't Spielberg's favorite because it's gritty or realistic. In fact, he loves it because it's absolutely bonkers. Picture this: Richard Burton, stone-faced and impossibly cool, teaming up with Clint Eastwood, the king of stoic squints, to pull off a rescue mission inside a Nazi fortress perched on top of a snowy mountain. Sounds straightforward, right? Think again. Double crosses, triple crosses. At one point, you start losing count of who's betraying whom, and once the bullets start flying, they never stop. The body count, the highest of Clint Eastwood's career, and that's saying something. Spielberg himself has called Where Eagles Dare his all-time favorite war movie, not because it's a masterpiece of realism, but precisely because it's so over the top. Richard Burton took the role just to entertain Elizabeth Taylor's kids and somehow turned it into his last big American hit. The film has become legendary for its iconic catchphrase, broadsword calling Danny boy, which even Spielberg likes to quote. The action scenes are so relentless, the explosions so cartoonish, you can't help but grin at the spectacle. And don't even try to predict the plot twists. This is one of those rare films where the script tries to out-crazy itself every 10 minutes. The kicker? For all its pulpy fun, Where Eagles Dare has real staying power. It's a movie dads love, sons steal from their dads, and directors like Spielberg rewatch just to feel that childhood rush. It's not subtle, it's not pretty, but it's unforgettable. Sometimes you just want your war movie to crank the volume to 11 and blow the doors off. Spielberg clearly gets that. The Zone of Interest, 2023. Spielberg has made the most powerful Holocaust film of all time, but even he admits there's room for new voices. And sometimes they catch him off guard. Case in point, The Zone of Interest. This film isn't a blood and thunder combat epic. It's something far more chilling, an unblinking look at evil hiding in plain sight. Director Jonathan Glazer drops you right next to Auschwitz, but instead of focusing on the camps, he lets the camera linger on the ordinary: picnics, gardens, a happy family. On the other side of the wall, genocide. Barely acknowledged, just a low, constant rumble in the background. Spielberg called this the best Holocaust film since Schindler's List, which is the kind of endorsement that gets film nerds fighting for tickets. What makes it hit so hard isn't gore or speeches, it's the terrifying banality. The commandant and his wife sip coffee while atrocities unfold a stone's throw away. It's an uncomfortable, slow-motion nightmare that refuses to give you a cathartic release. If you're expecting melodrama, you'll get silence. If you're looking for villains, you get ordinary people mowing their lawns and playing with their kids. The Zone of Interest racked up critical acclaim, snagged awards, and ignited controversy, but the real punch comes from how it sneaks up on you. Spielberg, who's always been obsessed with the "how did people let this happen" question, sees this film as an answer. It shows you how evil survives not just through monsters, but through neighbors, parents, the folks next door. By the time the credits roll, you're not just rattled, you're forced to question your own comfort zones. Is this an easy watch? Absolutely not. But, as Spielberg will tell you, the war movies that matter are the ones that leave a scar. And The Zone of Interest does exactly that, quietly, brutally, and with a precision that lingers long after you turn off the screen. A Battleground, 1949. What happens when you take real World War II veterans, throw them back into uniform, and tell them to relive the most miserable winter of their lives? You get Battleground, the post-war drama that Spielberg says shaped his whole view of war on screen. This isn't your grandfather's sanitized, flag-waving epic. It's mud, frostbite, fear, and the kind of black humor that only guys living in foxholes can appreciate. Released just a few years after World War II ended, Battleground broke the mold by hiring 20 actual 1st Airborne veterans, not as advisors, but as trainers and extras. The story zeroes in on the Battle of the Bulge, specifically the Siege of Bastogne, and you feel every frozen minute of it. Spielberg saw this film as a kid glued to old war movies on TV, and the realism hit him like a slap. The script was written by Robert Pirosh, a guy who didn't just interview soldiers, he fought in the battle himself. There's no artificial heroics here, just guys trying not to die or lose their toes to frostbite. At the time, critics wondered if audiences even wanted war films that felt this raw. The answer was a resounding yes. Battleground became MGM's biggest hit in half a decade, picked up 2 Oscars, and proved there was room for honest, unvarnished storytelling. Spielberg later credited Battleground for inspiring the kind of down-in-the-trenches realism that he brought to Saving Private Ryan. When you watch this one, you're not waiting for a soaring score or a big victory speech. You're listening to boots squelch in mud, men curse the cold, and sergeants barely holding it together. It's claustrophobic, grounded, and, maybe most shockingly, funny in the darkest way possible. For Spielberg, Battleground was proof that war movies could hit you in the gut and leave you thinking about the cost of every inch gained. The result? A blueprint for every honest war movie that came after. The Steel Helmet 1951. Forget Hollywood gloss. The Steel Helmet is as raw as war movies get. Shot in just 10 days on a shoestring budget, this was the first American film to tackle the Korean War, and it doesn't pull any punches. Spielberg has said this one shaped him the most, and you can see why. Director Sam Fuller, who'd lived through the trenches as a combat vet, delivered a movie that doesn't give you heroes or villains. It gives you scared, angry men with muddy boots and bad attitudes. There's a reason the studio heads and FBI were uncomfortable. The film shows a Japanese-American soldier talking about internment camps, U.S. troops executing prisoners, and race and rage boiling over in foxholes. Fuller knew how to capture war's brutal chaos because he'd been there. Spielberg, watching this as a kid, was floored by the way it refused to sugarcoat anything. The squad at the center of the Steel Helmet is barely holding together. Each character is on edge, carrying their own trauma. The action is quick, dirty, and often shockingly violent for the era. Equipment malfunctions, soldiers crack under pressure, and the line between survival and surrender gets razor thin. One small but wild detail. There's a character named Short Round, a name Spielberg would later give the kid's sidekick in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Coincidence? Not a chance. Critics didn't know what to make of it. Too political, too cynical, too soon after the war. But for Spielberg and fellow director Scorsese, who also idolized Fuller, this movie was a wake-up call. War on film could and should show the fear, the chaos, and the moral mess. The Steel Helmet is short, unsentimental, and punchy. Spielberg would carry its lessons for life. Don't glamorize, don't flinch, and tell the ugly truth. It's not just a movie, it's a boot to the head. Hell is for Heroes, 1962. Let's talk about chaos, on screen and behind it. Hell is for Heroes is a lean, stripped-to-the-bone World War II drama, starring Steve McQueen at his most stubborn, and Spielberg never forgets the nerve-shredding tension packed into its short runtime. The plot sounds simple. A small ragtag unit is forced to hold a critical line against overwhelming German forces, but nothing ever goes by the book. What you're really getting is a lesson in pure suspense, minimal resources, and maximum attitude. McQueen's presence alone is electric. He clashed with the director, fought with his co-stars, and generally caused as much mayhem behind the camera as his character did on the battlefield. In fact, things got so heated that the original director, Robert Pirosh, the Battleground guy, was replaced halfway through shooting. Budget cuts were so savage that the crew had to film every action scene on the same tiny stretch of set, killing the same German extras over and over just to make it work. The result? Every bullet feels desperate, every explosion just a hair away from disaster, and every moment is a reminder that war is mostly about improvising when everything goes wrong. Spielberg's admiration for this film is all about its honesty. There's no grandstanding or hero speeches, just ordinary men in impossible circumstances, hoping to survive until dawn. The humor is dark, the morale is lower, and the movie doesn't flinch from the ugly stuff. There's a real sense of futility, of characters pushed to their limits not by evil masterminds but by dumb luck and bad timing. For Spielberg, Hell is for Heroes is the anti-glamour war film, stripped down, brutally tense, and unforgettable for its relentless focus on survival, not glory. Paths of Glory, 1957. If you think all war movies are about explosions and heroics, Paths of Glory will gut-punch you right out of your comfort zone. This is Kubrick's first masterpiece, a film so raw, so merciless, that France banned it for nearly 2 decades. Spielberg has repeatedly praised it, and with good reason. There's never been a more damning indictment of military stupidity, cowardice, and the moral rot at the heart of war. The setup is brutally simple. French S, old years in World War I, are ordered to storm an unwinnable German position called the Anthill. It goes exactly as you'd expect. Disaster, chaos, and men killed by their own artillery, courtesy of vengeful generals who would rather murder their own than admit defeat. Kirk Douglas delivers what Spielberg called the best performance of his career as the colonel who tries, in vain, to save his men from a rigged court-martial. The final scene is legendary. Wounded, shell-shocked soldiers listening to a German girl sing in a smoky tavern, breaking down into tears that spill over into the audience. Spielberg has said he's screened just that scene to friends, claiming it's Kubrick's most human moment, proof that he was never as cold as critics claimed. The emotion hits so hard, even Spielberg admits, "We were all crying. The soldiers were crying. We were crying watching the soldiers cry." But this isn't just tragedy porn. Kubrick's direction is lean, unsentimental, and razor-sharp. There isn't a wasted shot or a wasted word. Every scene peels back another layer of hypocrisy. Every character is caught between duty and doom, and the final verdict is clear. The real enemy in war isn't always the guy across the trenches, but the men in charge. Paths of Glory is short, intense, and absolutely unforgettable. Spielberg says it changed his idea of what movies could do, turning the horrors of war into something that's as beautiful as it is devastating. Lawrence of Arabia, 1962. Now, let's raise the bar, literally. When Spielberg first saw Lawrence of Arabia, he was just a teenager, still making home movies on his Super 8. By the time the credits rolled, he was shell-shocked, speechless, and convinced the bar for filmmaking had just been set so high, maybe he shouldn't even bother. That's right, Spielberg, the man who changed Hollywood, almost quit before he started, because David Lean's epic Miracle left him in awe. Lawrence of Arabia isn't a traditional war movie. It's a mythic odyssey about identity, ambition, and the madness that war breeds in men's souls. Peter O'Toole's performance as T. E. Lawrence is all haunted blue eyes and nervous energy. The story sprawls across desert landscapes so vast and blinding, you feel the heat seeping off the screen. But what really hooked Spielberg is how Lean turns Lawrence's inner battles into the true war, his struggle to lead, to matter, to survive his own legend. Spielberg has called Lean his guru, watches Lawrence every year, and famously forces his friends to sit through it as a ritual. Beyond the visuals and the thunderous Maurice Jarre score, what really cements this film's greatness for Spielberg is its emotional honesty. War here isn't a parade of medals or victory speeches. It's trauma, exile, and the slow realization that nothing you do in battle ever makes you whole again. No wonder it swept the Oscars, earned critical worship from Scorsese and Coppola, and became a fixture on every greatest movies ever list. For Spielberg, Lawrence of Arabia is not just a movie. It's the reason he decided to become a director. Proof that cinema can be as epic and complicated as history itself. The Best Years of Our Lives, 1946. Here's the war film Spielberg calls one of the most honest ever made about what war does to people. Forget the guns and guts. The Best Years of Our Lives is about what happens after the shooting stops, when soldiers try to find their way home and realize nothing fits anymore. Released just a year after World War II ended, this movie follows 3 returning veterans as they struggle to pick up the pieces of their lives. They come back as heroes, but they're met with awkward silences, shattered families, and a country eager to move on without them. One of those vets is played by Harold Russell, a real-life Army paratrooper who lost both hands in the war. His performance is as raw as it gets. There's no acting here, just a man showing the world what it really means to live with scars that never heal. Spielberg is obsessed with that emotional truth, the quiet moments, the broken dreams, and the hope that flickers even when everything else seems lost. Tom Hanks once called this the best film ever made about the war and the generation who fought it, and Spielberg agrees, ranking it as essential viewing for anyone who thinks they know what war is really about. The film was a box office juggernaut, sweeping the Oscars, including Best Picture, Director, Actor, and Supporting Actor, and adjusted for inflation, it's still one of the most successful films of all time. But stats and trophies aside, the best years of our lives leaves its mark because it refuses to sugarcoat or sentimentalize. It's a film that sits with the pain, the confusion, and the quiet dignity of veterans who survived the fighting, but not always the peace. For Spielberg, that honesty is what makes it immortal. The Bridge on the River Kwai, 1957. If there's one film Spielberg loves to bring up when talking about epic war stories, it's The Bridge on the River Kwai. This isn't just a movie about building a bridge in the jungle. It's a ticking time bomb disguised as a classic. The setup: British POWs, led by the unflappable Alec Guinness, are forced by their Japanese captors to build a bridge for the enemy in Burma. What starts as a story about survival soon mutates into something weirder and way more disturbing, an obsession with pride, order, and the madness of war itself. Spielberg has often cited David Lean's masterpiece as one of the definitive World War II epics, and a personal favorite for its staggering scope, psychological depth, and sheer visual power. Watch those sun-baked landscapes, listen to that whistled march, and you'll see why filmmakers like Spielberg consider Lean a godfather of modern cinema. What makes Kwai so diabolical is how it twists heroism on its head. Guinness's Colonel Nicholson is so consumed with doing his duty, he starts helping the enemy, building a bridge to perfection, even as Allied saboteurs close in to blow it sky high. There's suspense, sabotage, and a jaw-dropping finale. Yes, that explosion. That still sets the standard for practical effects. But the movie's true genius is its moral ambiguity. Is Nicholson a hero, a madman, or both? Spielberg has pointed out how this film refuses to hand you easy answers, instead making you squirm as good intentions spiral into disaster. The movie swept the Oscars, of course, but for Spielberg, it's the ethical confusion that lingers. The Bridge on the River Kwai is about how war can twist even the noblest ideals into something unrecognizable. And for any director worth their salt, that's cinematic gold. If you want to see what happens when discipline goes off the rails, this is your ticket. The Great Escape, 1963. Some war movies hit you in the gut. Others make you want to grab a motorcycle and try to jump a barbed wire fence. The Great Escape is the latter, and Spielberg never forgets how this wild, rollicking POW adventure shaped his childhood, and his sense of what a team movie could do. Set in a Nazi prison camp filled with the Allies' most rebellious escape artists, this film is all about digging tunnels, outwitting captors, and making boredom look like a death sentence. It's based on a true story, but you'd be forgiven for thinking it was a work of pure wish fulfillment fantasy. Steve McQueen, the king of cool, steals the show and the camp's lone motorcycle for a final sequence that's still legendary. The ensemble cast is stacked with icons: James Garner, Charles Bronson, Richard Attenborough, each bringing their A-game to a story packed with suspense, gallows humor, and that irresistible "let's stick it to the Nazis" attitude. Spielberg has repeatedly credited The Great Escape with inspiring the sense of camaraderie and kinetic pacing in his own films, from Saving Private Ryan to Band of Brothers. But what really sets this one apart is its balance of fun and danger. For all the hijinks, there's an undercurrent of dread, because not every escapee gets out alive, and the cost of defiance can be heartbreakingly high. Spielberg has said that, as a kid, he wore out his TV re-watching this movie, dreaming of high-stakes adventure, but also absorbing its lesson. Even in the darkest times, a group of misfits with a plan and a little luck can leave their mark. The Great Escape is more than just a caper. It's the war movie that made rebelling against authority look like a sacred duty. 12 O'Clock High, 1949. Ever wonder what happens to men who are ordered to fly suicide missions over and over until they crack? 12 O'Clock High doesn't flinch from that ugly reality, and Spielberg considers it a touchstone for how to portray the psychological toll of war on film. This is no glossy aerial adventure. This is a bruising black and white deep dive into leadership, morale, and the human cost of command. Gregory Peck plays the hard-nosed general sent to whip a battered bomber group into shape. He's all business and cold steel at first. But as the casualties mount, his veneer of control starts to crumble. Spielberg has cited 12 O'Clock High as an influence on his own obsession with leadership and group dynamics. He points to the film's unflinching look at maximum effort missions flights where the odds of coming back are slim, and every decision weighs on a commander's soul. The flying sequences, shot with a mix of real combat footage and Hollywood trickery, still feel authentic and harrowing. But the movie's real power comes from the moments on the ground. Exhausted pilots staring at the ceiling, waiting for their turn in the meat grinder, and leaders buckling under the strain. This isn't a film about victory, but about holding on by your fingernails, even as hope slips away. Spielberg admires how it never cheapens the stakes or makes war look heroic. Instead, it's a slow-motion study of courage, doubt, and the limits of human endurance. 12 O'Clock High is essential Spielberg, painfully honest, rigorously unsentimental, and a crash course in why the best war movies don't just show battles, they show breakdowns. If you want to see where Spielberg's obsession with the psychology of command was born, look no further. Das Boot, 1981. Welcome to Claustrophobia, War Movie Edition. If Das Boot doesn't make you sweat, check your pulse. Spielberg has repeatedly praised Wolfgang Petersen's German U-boat epic for its nerve-shredding tension, authenticity, and refusal to glamorize even a single moment. Forget all those sun-drenched battlefields. This is war in a tin can, 50 feet below the Atlantic, where a single creak or drip could mean instant death. The film follows a young green war correspondent as he's thrown in with a hardened, exhausted U-boat crew, enduring endless patrols, depth charges, and the mind-numbing boredom between disasters. Spielberg admires Das Boot for making you live, breathe, and almost suffocate alongside its characters. The camera never leaves the boat, capturing every grimy, sweat-soaked, nerve-wracking minute. There's no rah-rah patriotism here. Just young men aging decades in a matter of months, fighting not for glory, but for survival against a faceless, implacable enemy, the ocean itself. The realism is so intense that even the machinery seems to be sweating. Petersen reportedly had his actors live in the cramped sets for weeks, and it shows. Every close-up is a portrait of anxiety. Every explosion feels like the hull might implode right in your living room. What really sets Das Boot apart, and what Spielberg points to again and again, is its unblinking honesty. The crew isn't demonized or lionized. They're scared, cynical, and desperate, just like any soldier from any country. By the end, when the battered survivors finally stagger back to port, the last twist is merciless. No happy endings, just the cold, gray reality of war. Das Boot is proof that a great war movie doesn't need wide-open spaces or flag-waving finales. Sometimes all it takes is a rusty old sub, a handful of doomed men, and enough tension to crush steel. If you want to know what Spielberg means by total immersion, start here. The Guns of Navaron, 1961. If you're looking for the blockbuster DNA that runs through Spielberg's biggest hits, look no further than The Guns of Navaron. This is old-school war adventure at its juiciest. A crack team of misfit Allied commandos is sent to destroy a pair of giant Nazi cannons on a remote Greek island. No big deal. Except the Nazis are everywhere, the odds are terrible, and nobody on the team can trust anybody else for long. It's classic men-on-a-mission stuff, with a cast that's pure charisma. Gregory Peck, David Niven, Anthony Quinn, and more. Each with their own scars, secrets, and axes to grind. Spielberg's affection for the Guns of Navaron is all about scale and style. The set pieces are massive, the suspense cranked up to 11, and every sequence is designed to make you clutch your seat. There's sabotage, betrayal, mountainside stunts, and enough explosions to satisfy any action junkie. But underneath the spectacle, there's a sly, subversive current. The film isn't afraid to show the cost of leadership, the reality of failure, or the ugly choices good men have to make when the mission is impossible. It's no secret that Spielberg borrowed from Navarone for his own large-scale ensemble adventures, from the desperate missions of Saving Private Ryan to the booby-trapped thrills of Indiana Jones. He's praised the way the film balances character and chaos, giving each team member their own moment to shine or unravel. And while it may feel pulpy compared to some of the rawer entries on this list, the Guns of Navaron endures because it's just plain fun. It's proof that a great war movie can be a thrill ride and say something about courage, doubt, and sacrifice. Spielberg wouldn't have it any other way. The Longest Day, 1962. Talk about ambition. The Longest Day is the original all-star, all-spectacle D-Day epic, and Spielberg has never shied away from crediting it as a childhood inspiration. This isn't just a war movie. It's a marathon. 3 directors, dozens of major stars, John Wayne, Henry Fonda, Sean Connery, Robert Mitchum, you name it, and a cast of thousands recreating the Normandy invasion in sprawling black and white detail. The result is a film that doesn't just dramatize a battle. It tries to capture every angle, every skirmish, every ounce of chaos that turned June 6, 1944, into the day that decided the war's fate. What makes The Longest Day so influential for Spielberg isn't just the spectacle, though the massive practical effects, beach landings, and sweeping camera work clearly set the template for Saving Private Ryan. It's the sense of scope, the idea that war is never about just one hero or one story, but about an entire world colliding at once. The film bounces from American paratroopers to French resistance fighters, from German commanders sweating bullets to everyday soldiers just hoping to survive the next 10 minutes. Spielberg has talked about watching this film on TV as a kid and feeling like he was seeing history unfold in real time. There's a weird, almost documentary sense to some sequences, but also plenty of good old-fashioned movie-making bravado. Sure, it's sometimes corny, and the cast list is longer than a phone book, but The Longest Day is still the granddaddy of all ensemble war movies. For Spielberg, it was a masterclass in how to balance scale, emotion, and pure cinematic adrenaline, one he'd put to good use when storming his own beaches decades later. All Quiet on the Western Front, 1930. Every war film on this list owes a debt to All Quiet on the Western Front. Spielberg has sung its praises for decades, calling it the original anti-war masterpiece, the film that set the gold standard for brutal honesty and gut-punch realism. Released just a dozen years after World War I ended, it doesn't play by Hollywood's usual rules. There are no noble sacrifices, no triumphant flag raisings, just mud, terror, and the steady unraveling of young men who marched off to war chasing glory and found only horror. The story follows Paul Boehmer and his classmates, kids turned soldiers by propaganda as they stumble from the classroom into the trenches. Their youthful optimism evaporates almost instantly, replaced by the sound of artillery, the screams of the dying, and a bleak parade of meaningless death. The film's raw power lies in its willingness to linger on the quiet moments. A soldier's hands shaking as he waits for the next barrage, friends breaking down over the bodies of comrades, the haunted thousand-yard stares of boys who are already old inside. When Spielberg talks about the impact of All Quiet on the Western Front, he always comes back to its truthfulness, that refusal to make war look exciting or clean. Technically, the film was groundbreaking. Those tracking shots over the trenches, the thunderous battle scenes, and the unflinching close-ups all laid the groundwork for the modern war epic. It was controversial in its day, banned in Nazi Germany, protested in France, and denounced by censors worldwide. But Spielberg considers it essential viewing for anyone who wants to understand not just cinema, but the cost of violence on the human soul. Even the recent 2022 adaptation gets his nod for carrying the same spirit. If you've ever wondered where the soul of every great anti-war film comes from, look no further. Spielberg knows All Quiet on the Western Front is the real deal. So, which of these films will you add to your must-watch list? And which ones will keep you up at night, questioning everything you thought you knew about war? Spielberg's recommendations aren't just a walk through history. They're a challenge to see conflict through new eyes. If these movies rattled the greatest living director, imagine what they'll do to you. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like and subscribe if you want more deep dives, and let's hear it. Which war film do you think Spielberg missed, or would you dare to recommend one back to him? The trenches of cinema are waiting.